Hello everybody, my name's Nick Parkin from Proceed, and before we do introduce Mark, our other speaker, a warm welcome not only to our UK attendees but also attendees from North and South America, Belgium, Germany and Holland, along with this time around attendees from India and South Africa, so you're all very welcome. If you want to ask questions, there will be time at the end, but can I suggest to ask questions as we go along? And if you look at the chat box down in the right-hand corner, you can actually ask questions, as I said before, we go as we go along. So let me introduce Dr. Mark Darbyshire, the CTO of SAP UK, who has considerable experience of customers on their journey to HANA and how this can help transform a customer's business. So over to you, Mark. Welcome.
Nick, thank you very much for that. And Michelle, thank you also for setting this up. It's a great pleasure and honour to present today. I think what we're seeing a lot of people trying to get an answer to is the question of, what happens as you evolve your systems, what happens as you go on your digital transformation, maybe your journey to S4, as you move to the cloud. That there's a whole range of momenta that people are undergoing at the moment, which forces organizations to look at their systems. And I've tried to sort of break this down into, okay, are your systems in the right places? Is the location right? And that's an increasingly complex question, especially in a Brexit world, in a world where there's multiple data compliance regulations in different parts of the world. Equally, you probably also, as part of evolving your systems, want to look at your processes. We in SAP have always placed great store in the value of business processes and end-to-end business processes. And obviously, as you evolve your systems, it's a great opportunity to assure yourself that your processes are efficient, but also are they rewarding? Do they also help improve maybe the lives of your customers, your suppliers, your partners and your employees? Not just are they cost efficient and do they have low exception rates? And I think related to that point, obviously, then is experience. Do your systems not just provide the screens that employees or customers drive, but do they also enable those customers, those employees, those partners to make better decisions for their benefit, but also for the benefit of your business? And of course, lastly, and probably most importantly, data. What as you evolve your systems, what happens to your data? And obviously, one of the questions I often like to ask customers is, do you have a data strategy? And most people's data strategies focus on the value and the potential of data. They don't often also consider the cost and potentially the liability of data. So one of the questions I would imagine Nick also asks quite a lot of customers is all of your data needed? Is all of the data in your SAP systems, will that be needed once those systems have evolved, once those systems have moved to the cloud? So part of what I think what I'd like to explore and help maybe answer today is what happens to all of your data? What do you do with it, and how do you do that? And as we're maybe, that's my perspective, but I also wanted to include some perspective from some of our customers. So we've asked customers in the UK, for example, what are their concerns about digital transformation? What are their concerns about moving towards S4, for example? And most people have not come back and said, well, we don't see any value in it, or it's too big a step for us to take on board. For a lot of people, their concerns are a lot more prosaic. Their concerns are a lot more day-to-day and operational. So data migration is a big concern. Being able to keep what we've called here custom processes, but also in many cases might be differentiating processes that allow that organization to either give their employees or their suppliers, or probably most aptly their customers, a differentiated, a better experience around a particular activity. That might be hire to retire in case of employees, or that might be the order to cash process in the case of customers. I think you understand where I'm going with that. Some of the other concerns are around things like security and privacy, or concerns around, well, okay, will this incur some unplanned downtime because my processes or my system are configured wrong, or data that I was expecting to be in a certain place isn't there? But what overall we see is that most customers, or the focus of most customers' concerns, is really around how do I get my data there? And part of, I suppose, the benefit of getting your data there is that that data will then help you and help your customers experience a better business model. So better digital core, better end-to-end operational experience, better end-to-end transactional experiences for the processes that this data will enable. And we've tried to capture some of that transition from traditional business models to new generational business models here on the left. And I'm not going to go through those, and you can read them as well as I can. And obviously from an SAP perspective, we've encapsulated a lot of that within the S/4HANA suite. So you've got end-to-end analytics that relies on the data. You've got a variety of options around automation in terms of decisioning, in terms of robotic processes, in terms of end-to-end business processes. Again, that relies on the data. But also you've got now the ability to have end-to-end business processes and next generation business processes that rely on that data. So data becomes something that's very important across all of this. And maybe some people find themselves asking at this point, you know, what might those new business models mean for me? And one that pops up on my LinkedIn feed quite often and on my Facebook feed quite often is a proposition that's come out from Volvo called Care by Volvo. And what Care by Volvo is essentially a subscription model for your car from Volvo. And as Volvo started to look at what this would mean in terms of their business systems, what this new business model would mean in terms of operational concerns, they realized that they would get a much broader set of data. So I don't just get the transaction of the car being sold data, or the movement of the car from manufacturing to warehousing to retail, but I also get lots of events about the car afterwards. I should see events from the insurance company telling me that this subscribed car is insured. I should see events from the usage of this car. I should see events from the services of this car. And so what Volvo started to realize was, in order to be able to support this new business model, this subscription business model in their case, they would have to support a lot more data, as in a lot more data volume and a lot more data velocity, but also a lot broader set of data types. It's not just transactional data, it's now operational, IoT, third-party data, and so on, as I've kind of alluded to. And what this made them realize was, well, okay, we need to prepare for our journey. And so as they looked at that, they needed to look at their, and this obviously is applicable to them and more broadly applicable, they needed to look at their existing deployments and technology. Was it appropriate for where they were going? They wanted to understand, you know, is the data in the right size and shape for what they want to do? And for many of one of the people at Volvo, their concerns was that their current systems wouldn't be able to cope with the volume and the velocity of the data. Do your processes, are they able to cope with the new business models that maybe you're proposing? And how does this then align with what the business wants to do? It's all well and good to launch a subscription model, but if it's operationally very clunky and it doesn't drive the business in the right ways, the outcome won't be what you want it to be. So part of their realization that they needed to move to a new business model, they needed to take advantage of a different way of approaching data, they needed to then prepare for that journey, also meant, well, okay, they needed to look at their existing SAP systems in order to look at that. And some of this is pretty standard stuff that people should be, in the most part, quite aware of. So things like a readiness check. Are you ready to move to S4? Things like business scenario recommendations. Are your business processes and how you use them, are they best of breed? Are they above or below the industry benchmarks? Are there things you could be taking advantage of? But also, lastly, what sort of transformations could you take advantage of along the way as you move forward towards that evolved system landscape? So you're wanting to move your landscape forward. In order to do that, you're wanting to adopt things like S4. As part of that, there's a recognition as well, or realization as well, that your data will change, but also you want to do that as efficiently as possible. And that's really what the focus of today is about. How can I move forward as efficiently as possible and eliminate as many of the potential and real obstacles between now and here and tomorrow and my future state? So the first obviously might be a very sensible thing to look to maybe do some data analytics and do some data quality analysis to reduce and clean your data. Eliminate data that's just wrong or irrelevant or incomplete, but also clean up and align and tidy the existing data that you've got so that you can make better use of it going forward. Archive the data that you don't need anymore. So I've called it here obsolete data. I think that's maybe a bit of a simplistic view. Archive the data that you don't really need to have going forward. And we've done lots of webinars, and others have done lots of webinars, and there's a lot of literature up on the websites available around what that archiving is. And I think Nick will go into a lot more detail as to how Proceed can help there. And I think this is really a very interesting area. But also it's an opportunity to consolidate and decommission legacy systems. So applications and insurance companies and car manufacturers might be good examples of organizations that have had systems running for 30, 40, 50 years. And this is a great opportunity as you move forward, as you evolve, to do something with them whilst trying to retain their value. And I think a lot of the value in those decommissioned systems is obviously going to be in the data, but in the data applied through the lens of the processes. So you need to decommission some of those legacy systems in the right way and retain their data. And then lastly, migrate only the data that you need going forward. Obviously, this gives you a whole bunch of advantages. The migration will be a lot easier and smoother and quicker. You'll only be taking forward a data footprint that you need. And so as you move on to that hyperscaler, which might charge you by the size of your data, or the transfer of your data, those costs will be lower. But also your system will run better because it won't have to keep dealing with all the exceptions and wrong data sets that maybe were already in there. So migrating only the right data forward, right in sense of size, right in sense of quality, and also right in sense of what's fit and needed for your business. These are, to me, are 4 really easy early steps that any organization can take in order to improve their ability to evolve to the cloud, to S4, to their future state, without it becoming a lengthy, painful, bogged down in the detail, nightmarish exercise. I don't think I'm saying anything here that's particularly new, but what I think we've tried to do here is bring all of these streams and strands together. One of the things that I often hear at customers' sites, sometimes from maybe from sales folk, is a sort of, well, you know, lifting and shifting is a little bit like moving house, or lifting and shifting to the cloud is a little bit like moving house. You only really want to take the data with you that you want. And whilst I'm not going to disagree with that, it doesn't necessarily give a very explicit answer as to what happens to all of your other data sets. And there might well be data sets that you can't, or you don't, or you shouldn't get rid of for various either legal and regulatory reasons, commercial reasons, or you might just want to keep that data maybe anonymized or in a reduced format for analytical purposes. So whilst it's all well and good to focus on the data that's going to move forward to the cloud, and it's obviously very important to do so because that will be your operational data image going forward, it's also very important to have a data strategy that covers off all of the other things and all of the other places that your data might end up. And that's why I said right at the beginning, you need to have a data strategy that doesn't just focus on the value of data, potentially also the cost and the liability of data. And this early stage of your evolution going forward helps you address some of that cost and liability question, as well as some of that value and benefit question. Now, how are you going to do this? Well, I'm a CTO, so I look at stuff at quite a high level, and I can then sit back in my hush puppies and be very content that the world is a better place. But what I wanted to do now was hand over to Nick, who can give you a lot more detail and a lot more hands-on experience as to what it actually means to start to adopt some of these tactics as part of your data strategy. Nick, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Proceed very quickly before moving on to how we can help customers on their move to HANA to S4. So we've been going 20 years now, and really I'd say most people, and certainly SAP and our partners, will recognize us as experts in SAP archiving, decommissioning, and content management. So we don't do FICO consulting, BW consulting, MM, SRM. This is what we're experts at, and we've been doing this for 20 years. Across the world, we have just over 650 customers where we've done projects. Most of those are large enterprise, and we have archived and decommissioned systems in most industries, whether it be public sector, pharmaceutical, food, finance, etc. And again, we've done a lot of work with customers that are multinational. So, you know, one of our big customers is a company like, for instance, British American Tobacco, where they operate in over 40 countries with nearly 40 different regulations around different countries in terms of how much they keep data. We've also got a strong partnership with a lot of partners out there, especially SAP, and I'll come on to that in a second, but we are also a partner of OpenText, people like VirtuStream, SMP, Synity, T-Systems, as well as doing work for a lot of SIs like Wipro, TCS, Tech Mahindra, because at the end of the day, you know, this is what we do for a living. And not all partners actually can do what we can do in terms of this archiving and decommissioning. We are an SAP Gold partner, and very luckily we are what they also call an SAP Master Services. We have a Master Services Agreement where we do a lot of work, services work through SAP around archiving and decommissioning. And again, one of the products that we use in SAP is this product called ILM, Information Lifecycle Management, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but we actually provide a lot of pre-sales and services work around that, and also input into future development of the product. Of those 650 customers, over probably the last 4 years, we've taken up at least 100 of those customers to SAP HANA, where we've reduced the size of the customer's database, whether it be on-prem or up in a hyperscaler. And right now, we are increasingly moving those 650 customers plus new customers to HANA. And it's a real focus on shrinking those databases down, as Mark said, and also then looking back and seeing what systems the customer has left behind in terms of to decommission. And again, I'll come on to that in a minute. But we have saved over the last 4 years, and we keep a good track of this, over $150 million for our customers on the journey to HANA. And the cost of doing these projects is a small fraction of that $150 million. So generally over 4 years, we've saved those 100 plus customers a lot of money. Okay, so looking back over the last couple of years, you know, we look at the challenges that our customers face, and we've highlighted two, which I'll come back to in a second. But the other challenges that typically our customers are facing is where they divest a subsidiary and they basically sell that off, the reverse of a merger and acquisition, where they're doing a sell-off, and basically they want to either remove that data from their system or give the buyer a decommissioned, an audit copy of that, and that is increasing. I have to say that we're doing more what I call divestitures for people, where we're actually creating an audit copy of the system. The other one is, as Mark mentioned, about regulatory requirements. It's quite surprising in Europe, but 2 years ago, well, yes, just over 2 years ago, back in 2018, the GDPR requirement came out. Lots of customers are still deep in their GDPR projects with SAP, because some of these landscapes are huge. And again, we are helping customers either remove data from their systems that they shouldn't have, or block the data, or minimize access to the data. And again, we're using this product called SAP ILM. And then mergers and acquisitions and digital transformation. Again, lots of people doing mergers and acquisitions, again, either wanting to take audit copies or systems decommissioning. And the thing that we started with 20 years ago still crops up, with people coming to us saying our systems are very slow. We're running on DB2, we're running on Oracle SQL Server, and we have performance problems. And typically, those around the database we can do something with. It's quite interesting for me that I thought when HANA came out and all of the press and everything else, HANA was going to be the savior of performance issues, and to some extent it is. But as I said, we've got over 100 customers now on HANA, and customers do still find performance problems, would you believe it? And again, we can help solve those by starting to minimize the amount of data they have. But the two challenges here highlighted: moving to S4 HANA or Business Suite on HANA, and moving to a hyperscaler. So I'd say probably of every 10 customers that come to us, 8 have got one of these challenges. And the top challenge is very simple. If you've got a lot of data, then moving that data, as Mark said, the migration time takes a long time. If you're going on-prem with the hardware, the cost of acquisition could be high because of the amount of data you've got. And then moving to a hyperscaler, I have to say, as we've been doing this for 4 years, moving to hyperscalers, everybody thinks, oh, well, it's going to be much cheaper than doing it on-prem. Well, it is if you get it right, but it can be even more expensive if you get it wrong and you continue to grow your databases. So really, I'm going to try to concentrate on these two highlighted and show you what Proceed can do and what it has done. Okay. So the first one is very simple. It's moving my ECC6 system to S4, and I'm going to do a brownfield migration. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I'm literally going to do a technical upgrade here and move it. But I've got in my database a lot of what I call current operational data. So this is probably data that's 1 or 2 years old, but I might have a lot of what I call old, or data that is now business complete. I just want it from audit purposes, and it's still in my database. So we have examples where, and very recently, where we've come across companies that have got they've had SAP for over 20 years. They've never done any housekeeping or archiving, and they're now moving to a brownfield situation, and they're saying, what, I'm taking 20 years of data into memory. Do I really need to do this? And of course the answer is I don't. So how are we doing that? It's very simple. I'm using this product called ILM, Information Lifecycle Management, and really what I'm doing is I'm looking at that old data and seeing whether I actually need it for what I call day-to-day operations. Okay, and the problem is most people, when they use the word archive, and especially when they go back to their business users and say, we're about to start an archiving project, typically you watch the blood drain from the user's face because they think they're never going to see their data again. Using archiving in SAP with ILM is very different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that old data that is business complete. I really only need it for audit purposes, and I might need it for some legal purposes, but I'm going to take that out of my database. I'm going to store it in ILM safely away. I'm going to compress it so it's much smaller. And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that current operational data, I'm going to migrate it to HANA, and then I'm going to reattach my archive. And one of the questions most people ask is, oh, well, you know, I had my my finance system in ECC, but when I moved to S4HANA, it simplified finance. Aren't the data structures all different? Yes, they are, but using archiving in SAP with ILM, it's very clever in that when you bring that data back into HANA to look at it, it's creating the old structures so you can still look and report on that data. So to some extent, there are really no good reasons why, if somebody's got probably more than 4 years of data in their SAP system, why you would move all of that into HANA. It doesn't make sense from a cost point of view, doesn't make sense from a migration point of view. So this is pretty easy to do. So this is Brownfield. What we then have is what I call Greenfield, and this is, I've got my ECC 6 system, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to create a brand new S4 system. So what I might do is I might take some master data over. I may take some open items over, but basically I'm going to redo my chart of accounts. I'm going to redo my sales orgs, my purchasing groups, etc., etc. Okay. What do I do with that old ECC 6 system? Because at the end of the day, anywhere in the world, you will need to keep that data for so long. So, for instance, in the UK, we have Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which could come in to do a tax audit. They will go back and want to look at 7 years data. We're just working with customers, companies in SAP customers in China, where the Chinese government say we want permanent retention, which means 100 years plus. So they want to keep data for 100 years and go back 100 years. So what do I do with that old ECC 6 system? So basically what I do is I decommission it. I take the data out, I put it into what they call is an ILM retention warehouse. And then once I've moved all of that data, I can then throw that or turn that SAP system off, and I can still report on that data, but it's heavily compressed, but I've still got all of that data intact, all the schema still there, and I can view that data. And again, lots of customers going to Greenfield sites right now, or Greenfield situations, are doing exactly this. What happens if I'm what we call a net new customer? So I've never had ECC 6 before, I'm brand new to SAP, and there are customers out there like that, and we've got a few at the moment that have never seen an SAP system before, and they're thrown in the world of HANA brand new. At the end of the day, that HANA system, because it's in memory, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we've already seen a couple of customers that took S4HANA a couple of years ago. They've had to upgrade their on-prem, they've had to upgrade their hardware a couple of times just to cope with the growth. Again, this is, you know, probably not very clever, in that you need to control that HANA growth, and there are a number of ways of doing it. So you can do what we call tiering, where you've got hot, which is your memory, you've got warm, which could be extended memory, and then you've got cold, which is basically an archive. So again, I can archive the data out of my S4 system, put it into ILM, and then basically from my S4 system, look at that data that I've archived. So for net new customers, this is the way to go, but there may be a middle tier here that gives you some warm data. But also, we've got customers right now who are moving. They're not necessarily going to S4 or HANA straight away, but they're moving to a hyperscaler with their existing infrastructure. So whether they be on Oracle, DB2, SQL Server, ASE, etc. And again, we can save customers huge amounts of money because it's exactly the same as a brownfield migration, in that you've got your, do you really want to take 10 years, 20 years of data over to a hyperscaler and run it on a consumption model? Again, what we can do is we can archive that data off into ILM. Again, it's heavily compressed. And whether it's a hyperscaler like Microsoft or AWS or Google, they have some incredibly, I use the word cheap advisedly, but they have some very cheap storage where you can store this data, but you can still get access to it. So again, we have customers that have gone to Azure and AWS that have saved themselves a considerable fortune by literally taking that old non-operational data and storing it securely, but still can see it in their ECC6 system sitting on a hyperscaler, but it's just coming back from the archive. Okay, whoops, sorry, I think I've gone the wrong way. Okay, so how do we do that? So one of the things that we look at is how much we achieve with our customers. So typically, if a customer comes to us that is probably over 2 years old and running an SAP system, and the longer you've been running SAP, the more we can achieve. So we've seen anything from data savings from 33% up to 90% of a customer's storage saving, okay? And if you go into a hyperscaler, and depending on how much data you've got in your system, we've got customers that have saved themselves over £1 million per terabyte. And don't forget, it's not just your production system that you've got to take to the hyperscaler. You've got your DR, you may have a pre-prod, you've got QA, you've got test, dev, you might have some sandboxes. So across the landscape, all of that becomes a very big consumption cost. So we've got customers right now where we've saved them over £1 million per terabyte per year. And don't forget, that's what consumption means. You're paying for it all of the time. And I'd say over the last 4 or 5 years, we've saved our customers well over 12,000 terabytes of saved space of either going to on-prem or a hyperscaler where we've removed that from their systems. How do we achieve this? Very simply, as I said, we don't do other things like FICO consulting or SD. We have those consultants, those type of consultants in Proceed, but we are SAP data management experts. So the majority of our people have got at least 5 years SAP experience and another 2 years of archiving. Some of us in the company have got 20 years plus of archiving experience. And it's nothing to really, archiving, it's got nothing to do with technology per se. It's how you talk to the business. So, really, what I don't want to do is get my basis guy to talk to the financial director and start explaining archiving, because he's going to talk from a technical viewpoint. What I want to do is get one of our FICO consultants to talk to the FD or the VP of Finance and explain how archiving works and how they're going to get their data back, and we're not going to lose them any data. The other thing we've got is we have this 20 years of experience of working in all different sectors, okay? Whether it be, chemical, pharmaceutical, where you've got FDA, public sector, everybody's processes are different. And because we have a really good working knowledge of those business processes, it's what I call a tried and tested approach to archiving. We then have a set of tools that we bring. So one of the problems that we always face with the customer is the customer says, "Oh, I want to archive all this data, but unfortunately, I haven't closed those transactions down from 10 years ago." And with archiving, you cannot archive things that are still open in SAP. and nobody is going to go back to the business and say, please close down that 1 million of transactions from 5 years ago. So again, over 20 years, we've come up with a set of programs to actually close transactions down, show you what state your data is in. It may need to be cleansed before we start to archive it, and this always speeds up the archiving process. So just a couple of customers here. We have I can tell you who they are. I don't think we need to hide them. So we have a global food business in Canada called McCain's, the frozen food people. They operate in about 34 countries around the world. And when we went in there with them, they'd been doing a little bit of archiving, but it was incredibly difficult to do because of all of these regulations around the world in terms of retention times. We put ILM in for them, we set their archiving objects up, and they had about nearly 5 people running their archiving for them. By the time we set it all up and made sure it all worked for them, they got down to a quarter of a full-time employee running their archiving, and they run it archiving weekly, monthly, and quarterly. The other customer down here, the UK DIY company, is Kingfisher. For those that are in the UK and some in Belgium and Germany, they have other, they're B&Q in the UK and other companies abroad. They were one of the first customers on HEC. They are one of the largest customers on the HANA Enterprise Cloud. Very little archiving done before going to HEC, but again, they went to HEC, and then all of a sudden, every month they get a bill, and the bill keeps going up because they're adding more data to the system and not taking any data out. So they were the first cut. They came to us. We were probably the first with them to actually install ILM and this product called SAP IQ, which is a column database where you store the archive in HEC. And today it's really good because for every 100 gig they put into their memory, they're taking 100 gig out and storing it away in the archive. So their addition of data is very flat. They've kept their memory under control and saved themselves a vast fortune in the process. One thing we talked about was going to Greenfield. And one of the problems that we found is when a customer goes to Greenfield and they go to a hyperscaler and they've been running all this stuff on-prem before, they go, great, we're up on the hyperscaler now with S/4HANA, and they look around and it's either in somebody else's data center or their own, look at all of these systems that we're still running. And so one thing that we have been doing more and more of with customers is when they've been going to S4 is looking at what they've left behind, whether that's an ECC system, a CRM, an SRM, or it even could be a non-SAP system, and why are you still running all of this? Isn't there an easier way to do it? Because you're still running all this infrastructure, you may be still paying software and hardware maintenance, and you've probably got people still looking after these systems. So typically what we're trying to do here is move those, create systems where that data is still intact so you can still report on it, but you really are mitigating the business risk. So I mean, we've got customers that go, no, we're going to leave it because we've got to keep this data for 10 years. And they basically left those systems running, maybe in some virtualized state. But what happens in 5 years' time or 7 years' time when you press the button and you want that system to spin up and it doesn't because it's got a hardware problem, you're not on maintenance any longer, you have a problem if you've got to give it to some form of outside agency like a tax authority. Also, the cost of running these systems is, can be fantastic. So, we've gone into customers where they've got 50 systems, 100. The biggest one we've ever seen is over 800 legacy systems in a data center, and they're still running them, and they're paying to keep the hardware going and keep that software going. To me, that's crazy when they are literally audit copies of software. you can actually move those. And probably the biggest, another big thing, you know, think about all of that spinning kit and all those CPUs running from a green environmental objective. So again, we've done lots of decommissioning of customers where we've either done the decommissioning or we've set up a decommissioning factory to let the customer's SI do it. So the top customer here at the top is another Canadian food business called Maple Leaf Foods. They're a very large meat processor in Canada. And they sold off their bakery business. They not only had a meat, but a bakery business. And they got us to decommission the whole of the SAP estate that was the bakery business, over 88 terabytes. So we went in there and we literally picked that 88 terabytes up, shrank it down as much as possible, and left them with a very small working environment, but also gave the bakery business their own data. The major pharmaceutical company here is GlaxoSmithKline. They have multiple old SAP systems and non-SAP, as you see here, JD Edwards. We set the factory up for their SI, which was Tech Mahindra, and we basically built the factory, showed Tech Mahindra how to do it, and they then got on to do all of these systems. And again, we have a lot of people coming to us say, can you set the factory up for us? We'd like our SAP SI to actually do the work, and we're very happy to do that. And then the major UK bank at the bottom is Barclays, where they are starting to go look at their old systems and start to decommission. And again, we've set up an internal factory for them. They haven't got an SI doing it, they're doing it themselves, but we are giving them the knowledge transfer to do it themselves. Okay, that's it from me. We've come to the end here. We've got kind of 10-15 minutes. If there are any questions, Michelle, I'll let you.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you, Mark. Yes, we have some questions come in. First one is for Mark. We're talking internally at the moment about moving to S4. We talk about the journey. When should we start this, in your opinion?
Obviously, I'm going to say as soon as possible. I'm talking to a number of customers at the moment that are looking to move to S4 this year, and we've just started the conversation. And whilst that's not going to necessarily negatively impact them, the more time that you can look at it beforehand, the better, the easier, the smoother it's going to be. But I would say probably as a rule of thumb, 6 to 12 months at a minimum.
Thank you. And another one for you, Mark. Nick talked about Greenfield and Brownfield migrations to S4. Have you any idea on the uptake of what people are doing and why?
Oh, yes. So I don't have percentages, but what I can see is that the options are becoming broader. So we've got Greenfield, Brownfield. I'm also seeing Bluefield and Yellowfield. I don't actually necessarily know what they mean. But I think what we're trying to do at SAP is give people a broader range of journeys to move to S4. I think in the past, what I've seen maybe is the majority of those S4 journeys to be Greenfield, not by very much, but I think increasingly people are going to want to bring a certain amount of their legacy and their heritage with them. And so I think it won't just be either new or old. I think it'll be increasingly a spectrum. So apologies if that's a bit of a woolly answer, but I think that's reflected in some of the new offerings that SAP is putting together around S4 this year.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. One for Nick now. We have 20 years of data in our SAP system. It's 15 terabytes. We're going to S4 within the next 24 months. Firstly, have we got time to get their data reduced, an archiving project? And what would your guess be in how much they could get it down by? Are there any percentage averages?
Okay, so as Mark says, the the quicker you start, the better. But I mean, I'll give you a good example. I can't name the customer because we're not allowed to right now, but we had a customer at the end of last year who had more than 20 years of data going to Azure, and basically for nearly 5 months before they went to Azure, they started to realize what the cost was going to be of taking this 22 years of data over. So they came to us, and literally we did a project. I'd say we did like the emergency project, so 12 weeks to get their data right the way down so they could get into a footprint on Azure that they could afford. And I'd say that 12 weeks was really an emergency one to me. You know, the longer, a year before would be fantastic. Yeah, 6 months before would be good. Please don't give us 3 months unless you want to do the emergency. In terms of percentage, I'd say if you've been going 20 years and you've got 15 terabytes, I'd say, and I kind of put a bet on this, you know, £100 or $100. 15 terabytes, something like that, I'd say we could get you down to probably under 3 terabytes. Okay, probably less than that. Because at the end of the day, why do you need 20 years of data? You probably only need 2 or 3 years of data online. The rest of it can go into the archive. You're not going to lose any of that data, and you're going to be able to bring that back from the archive. Okay, so you know you could make substantial savings there.
Thank you, Nick. And again, one for Nick. What are the biggest challenges in an archiving project?
Okay, so they've got nothing to do with technology, and this is where probably our experience over 20 years comes in, because a lot of people go, oh, well, I get my basis guy to just archive those biggest tables. The problem is anybody can archive stuff. I mean, you know, I could take a basis person that's got 6 months, show them the archiving and say, go archive. That's not the issue. There are 2 really big issues, well, 3 issues here probably. One is what I mentioned before, is you go to the business and say you're going to archive. And I said before, you just watch the blood drain from their face, because what does archiving mean to people? It means putting things in the basement with cobwebs. I'm never going to see my data again. So you've got to get, first of all, you've got to get over to that problem. Once you've got over that problem, it's fine. The next problem is, what you don't want to do is archiving by committee. So what you want to set up is a small working group. I mean, one of our customers, again, which will remain nameless, we went into a kickoff meeting and there were 60 people, and we had 60 people all wanting to have some input into the archiving. And we said to the customer at the time, keep it down to a team of maybe under 10. And what all that does, it just extends the project longer and longer and longer, because if I get 5 finance people in a room and say to them, how long do we need to keep this data for? You get 5 different answers. And that's going to be one of the problems, is trying to get everybody to agree how much data you take out and how long you keep it for. And I'd say the last issue is this thing I mentioned before, which is business complete inside SAP. Because if you've got a purchase order from 5 years ago and you ordered 100 of product A and only 90 were delivered, and you've got 10 still open, that will not archive. And when we go into customers, we have some software that looks at how much data people can archive. And we've seen really good customers that keep to procedures and everything else and got really clean data, and even they can only archive 90% of the data. They've still got 10% of the data that's not business complete. But we've seen customers that have got no idea how to keep their processes going, no idea how to close transactions down, they never, and they then, when we tell them we can only archive 5% of their data, 95% of it isn't business complete, they then go, well, how did that happen? Well, very simply, because you've never kept the procedures going to do it. So there are lots of different reasons, but because we've been doing this for 20 years, we know how to, calm a customer down, talking about archiving, how to come up with the retention periods, how to close these transactions down.
Thank you, Nick. That's great. Any more questions from anyone? You can just pop them in the chat. I've got one more here. From Mark, I think it's from you for your slides. It says, how long to achieve the outcomes, and do they represent any point of no return?
I think as you move to the cloud and the strategy that we're outlining of archiving data that you don't need and decommissioning systems that you don't want to keep running, they don't represent points of no return necessarily up until you start running that reduced data image in the cloud, and then that then evolves, and obviously the other data sets don't evolve with it. So that the point of no return really is when you go live with your evolved systems, to my mind. How long to get to that point? Much as Nick has said, it really depends. It depends on how big your systems are, how complex your landscape is. But I think Nick was talking about 6 to 12 months, and I wouldn't disagree with that.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, I think that's all the questions. So we will be sharing the recording and the slides with you in the next couple of days. And thank you for joining us. And thank you, Nick and Mark, for taking the time to present. Thanks, you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.